The gym water bottle hit the floor with a hollow thud that echoed across the empty free weight section. Amber didn't look up from her phone as she stepped over it, earbuds already in, playlist already cued. She'd been coming to Iron Valley Fitness for 3 months now, always at 6:30 in the morning when the place was still half empty, and she could claim her corner by the squat rack without negotiation. The bottle wasn't hers. She didn't leave things lying around. That was the first wrong detail on a Tuesday morning that should have been ordinary. The second wrong detail was the new guy standing by the check-in desk, talking to the manager with the kind of easy confidence that usually meant trouble. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a staff shirt that fit too well to be accidental. Amber caught his profile as she scanned her membership card and felt an immediate, irrational flash of annoyance. Great. Another trainer who'd probably try to sell her a package she didn't need. She'd been an athlete her whole life. Division 2, track in college, 2 half marathons since graduation, a clean eating routine that didn't need fixing. The last thing she wanted was some smooth-talking instructor, assuming she didn't know what she was doing just because she was a woman in the weight room. She'd dealt with enough of that already. If you're watching this right now, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to know who's following this story with me. Amber moved toward her usual spot, but the new guy was already there. Not working out, setting up cones, rearranging the benches, claiming the entire section like it was his personal territory. She stopped 3 feet away, arms crossed, waiting for him to notice. He looked up after a beat, meeting her eyes with a steady, unreadable expression. "Morning," he said. His voice was low, professional, completely neutral. "This area's reserved for the next hour. I'm running a mobility clinic." "I work out here every morning," Amber said flatly. "Same time, same spot for 3 months." "I understand that." He didn't move, didn't apologize. Just stood there with a clipboard in one hand and a resistance band in the other like he had every right to disrupt her routine. "The clinic's on the schedule, posted last week. You're welcome to join, or you can use the cardio section until 7:30. The cardio section, like she was some casual gym-goer who didn't know the difference between a deadlift and a leg press. Amber felt her jaw tighten. "I'm not interested in a clinic. I have my own program." Noted. He turned back to his setup, dismissing her without another word. That was it. No negotiation, no compromise. Just a blank wall of professional courtesy that somehow felt worse than outright rudeness. Amber stood there for 5 seconds longer than she should have, heat rising in her chest, before she turned and walked to the far side of the gym. She'd used the damn cardio section. For today. But this wasn't over. His name was Jordan. She found out from the staff board by the locker rooms after her workout, when she was still too irritated to let it go. Jordan Ellis, certified personal trainer, specialist in functional movement and injury prevention. The photo next to his name showed the same calm, unreadable expression he'd given her that morning. No smile, no attempt to look approachable, just competence and distance. Amber didn't like him. It had nothing to do with who he was, and everything to do with what he'd done. He'd walked into her space, disrupted her routine, and treated her like an inconvenience. In her world, respect was earned through consistency and discipline. He'd shown her neither. The next morning, she arrived at 6:15, early enough to claim her spot before any clinic could start. But Jordan was already there, running a one-on-one session with an older man who moved through stretches with the careful precision of someone recovering from surgery. Amber watched from the treadmill, annoyed at herself for watching, more annoyed that Jordan never once looked in her direction. She kept her distance for a week, used different equipment, adjusted her schedule, told herself it didn't matter. But every time she saw him in the gym, that same tight knot of irritation settled in her stomach. He was good at his job. She could see that. His clients listened to him, trusted him. He moved through the space with an economy of motion that suggested years of practice, not just certification courses and sales pitches. That should have softened her opinion. It didn't. If anything, it made the dismissal sting more. He clearly knew what he was doing, which meant he'd looked at her that first morning and decided she wasn't worth his time. The rupture came on a Friday. Amber was halfway through her second set of Bulgarian split squats when she heard the crash. Metal on concrete, a sharp, sudden sound that cut through the gym's ambient noise and turned every head in the room. She dropped her weight and ran toward the sound on instinct, athletes' training overriding everything else. Jordan was already there, kneeling next to a man in his 50s who'd collapsed near the bench press, barbell still racked above him, face grey and sweating. The man's breathing came in short, shallow gasps. His left arm clutched his chest. "Call 911, Jordan said without looking up. His voice was steady, authoritative, cutting through the freeze that had gripped the handful of other gym members nearby. Now. Amber pulled out her phone, fingers already dialing. She gave the address to the dispatcher, answered the questions about symptoms and consciousness, kept her voice level even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Jordan had the man on his back now, checking his pulse, asking questions in that same calm, unshakable tone. "Aspirin," Jordan said, glancing at the front desk staff who'd appeared at the edge of the crowd. "First aid kit, and get everyone back. Give us space." The staff moved. The crowd moved. Amber stayed, phone still pressed to her ear, watching Jordan work. He knew exactly what to do. No hesitation, no panic, just systematic assessment and decisive action, the kind of competence that only came from real training and real experience. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. Jordan briefed them in clean, efficient sentences. Onset of symptoms, current vitals, medical history he'd gathered in the span of 3 questions. They took over without missing a beat, and Jordan stepped back, letting them work. The gym had gone quiet. No music, no clanking weights, just the sound of equipment being loaded, a stretcher being wheeled out, the mechanical click of doors closing. The man was stable, conscious, talking to the paramedics as they took him to the ambulance. Amber stood near the water fountain, phone still in her hand, watching Jordan wipe down the bench press area like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just kept someone alive through the worst 6 minutes of that person's day. "You know CPR," she said. It wasn't a question. Jordan looked up, his expression still unreadable. Wilderness First Responder certification, renewed every 2 years, part of the job. That's not part of a personal trainer cert. No. He didn't elaborate, just went back to cleaning. Amber wanted to say something else. "Thank you, maybe," or "I'm sorry for assuming." But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with the week of resentment she'd been carrying. So she said nothing. Just grabbed her water bottle and left. She thought about it all weekend, replayed the scene in her head, the calm in his voice, the certainty in his movements, the way he'd taken control of a crisis without making it about him. It should have changed her opinion. It did change something, but the core irritation remained stubborn and irrational, and she couldn't figure out why. Monday morning she arrived at 6:30 and found Jordan restacking weights near the squat rack, her squat rack, again. "Morning," he said, the same neutral tone as always. "Morning." Amber set her bag down, pulled out her lifting belt, waited. Jordan finished stacking and moved to leave. Then he paused, turned back. "You were good on Friday, kept your head, gave dispatch clean information." It was the first compliment he'd given her, the first acknowledgement that she'd done anything right. Amber felt something shift in her chest, a tiny crack in the wall of resentment she'd built. "You were better." Different skill sets. He shrugged. "You run, right? I've seen you on the track outside." She hadn't known he'd noticed. "Half marathons mostly, some trail running when I can get out of the city." "Injury-free?" "So far." "Good." He picked up his clipboard from the bench. "The mobility clinic I run on Tuesdays. It's designed for endurance athletes, helps with hip flexor tightness and IT band issues. No charge for members, if you're interested." It was an olive branch, a small one, offered without fanfare or expectation. Amber should have taken it, should have said yes, should have let the grudge go, but something stubborn in her refused. "I'll think about it," she said. Jordan nodded once and left. She didn't go to the clinic, didn't adjust her opinion, kept her distance and told herself it was about principle, about not letting someone disrupt her routine just because they were competent in a crisis. But the truth, the part she didn't want to examine too closely, was simpler and more complicated. She didn't know how to be wrong about him, didn't know how to reconcile the dismissive trainer. She'd decided he was with the man who'd knelt on a gym floor and saved someone's life without breaking a sweat. So she defaulted to avoidance, easier than honesty, safer than change. The escalation started small. A scheduling conflict over the squat rack, an accidental collision near the dumbbell shelf. Little moments that should have been nothing but felt loaded with the weight of unspoken tension. Jordan never pushed, never called her out, just maintained that same professional distance that made Amber feel simultaneously invisible and hyper-aware of his presence. The pressure closed in from an unexpected direction. The gym announced a partnership with a local physical therapy clinic. New program, new protocols. All trainers required to cross-train on injury assessment and modified programming, which meant Jordan would be running workshops, mandatory for staff, open to members. The first one was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m., right when Amber usually finished her evening lifting sessions. She could skip it, should skip it, but the flyer on the bulletin board caught her eye. Common running injuries, recognition, response, and prevention. Her IT band had been tight for 2 weeks. Nothing serious, just enough to notice, just enough to make her wonder if she was ignoring something that would bite her later. She signed up, told herself it was practical, not personal. The workshop was held in the gym's group fitness room, chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a projector screen. 15 people showed up. Amber recognized a few regulars, a couple of staff members, and 3 runners from the local track club she'd trained with briefly last summer. Jordan stood at the front, setting up his laptop with the same methodical efficiency he brought to everything else. He started with anatomy, clean diagrams, clear explanations, no jargon, no condescension. Then he moved into assessment, live demonstrations with volunteers, how to identify muscle imbalances, when to push through discomfort versus when to stop. Red flags that meant, see a doctor, not a trainer. Amber took notes, actual notes on her phone, because the information was good, and she wasn't too proud to admit she didn't know everything. Jordan's teaching style was direct, but not rigid. He invited questions, corrected misconceptions without making anyone feel stupid, and told stories from his own training that illustrated points without turning into ego trips. Halfway through, he asked for a volunteer to demonstrate hip flexor assessment. No one moved. Amber's hand went up before she could talk herself out of it. Jordan's expression didn't change. Thanks, come on up. She walked to the front, hyper-aware of the roomful of eyes on her, even more aware of Jordan's proximity as he explained the assessment protocol. His hands were professional, impersonal, guiding her through the positions with the same detached competence he'd use on any client. But Amber felt every point of contact like a live wire. Tightness here, he said, pressing gently on her hip flexor. See how the muscle resists. That's compensation, probably from overstriding. You feel that when you run? Sometimes, Amber admitted. Last few miles of a long run. Classic pattern. He stepped back, giving her space to stand. Needs targeted stretching and glute activation work. I can write up a protocol if you want. That'd be helpful. The words came out quieter than she intended. Jordan nodded, made a note on his clipboard, and moved on to the next topic. Amber returned to her seat, face warm, brain spinning. The assessment had lasted maybe 90 seconds, purely professional. But something about it had cracked her open in a way she wasn't prepared for. After the workshop ended, people lingered to ask individual questions. Amber hung back, straightening her notes, waiting for the crowd to thin. When the last person left, Jordan started packing up his equipment. She approached slowly, not sure what she was going to say. That was good, she offered. The workshop. I learned a lot. Glad it was useful. He unplugged the projector, wound the cord with practiced precision. I'll email you that stretching protocol tonight. You don't have my email. It's in the sign-up sheet. He glanced at her, something almost like amusement flickering in his eyes. Standard procedure. Right. Of course. Amber felt foolish for not realizing. Well, thanks. No problem. Jordan zipped his laptop bag closed. For what it's worth, your form on the squat rack is solid. I should have said that the first morning. Instead of just kicking you out of your spot, the apology caught her completely off guard. You were just doing your job. Doesn't mean I couldn't have handled it better. He slung the bag over his shoulder. I get territorial about programming sometimes. Forget that not everyone wants to be coached. I was territorial too, Amber said before she could stop herself. About the space, about my routine. I made assumptions. We both did. Jordan met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression wasn't neutral. It was open, honest, a little tired around the edges. Clean slate? Yeah. Amber felt the knot in her chest finally loosen. Clean slate. The protocol arrived in her email that night. 3 pages, neatly formatted, with photos and detailed instructions. Amber read it twice, implemented it the next morning, and felt the difference within 3 days. Her hip flexor released. Her stride smoothed out. The tightness that had been building for weeks dissipated like it had never existed. She should have thanked him, should have acknowledged the help, but she kept defaulting to avoidance, even as the grudge dissolved. Old habits. Easier than vulnerability. The procedural thread emerged from an unexpected source. The gym's insurance provider required updated incident reports on the medical emergency from 2 weeks prior. Standard liability protocol. But the man who'd collapsed, a longtime member named Victor, had hired a lawyer. Not to sue, to ensure his own medical records were accurate for his insurance claim. The lawyer requested statements from witnesses, documentation of response time, verification of Jordan's credentials. Amber got the email on a Wednesday afternoon. Formal request for a written statement describing what she'd observed during the incident. She almost deleted it, almost pretended she hadn't seen it. But something about the man's grey face, about Jordan's steady hands, made her open a new document and start typing. She kept it factual. Times, actions, observations, no editorializing, no personal commentary, just what she'd seen and heard. But when she finished and read it back, the truth was inescapable. Jordan had been the reason Victor was alive. Not luck, not good timing. Competence and training and the kind of calm that only came from someone who'd been in high-pressure situations before. She sent the statement to the lawyer, copied the gym management, and didn't mention it to Jordan. It wasn't about him. It was about accuracy, about making sure the record reflected what actually happened. The turn came 3 days later. Amber was at the gym early, running intervals on the treadmill, when the manager approached with a tablet in hand. Hey, got a second? She slowed to a walk, pulling out her earbuds. What's up? Insurance follow-up on the Victor incident. The manager, a efficient woman in her 40s named Patricia, tapped the screen. Your statement helped clarify the timeline, but I wanted to check something with you. You wrote that Jordan assessed Victor for approximately 90 seconds before calling for the aspirin. That's pretty specific. I was on the phone with dispatch, Amber said. They asked for a description of symptoms. I was watching him work. Right. Patricia scrolled through something on the tablet. Thing is, Jordan's incident report says 2 minutes. We're trying to figure out which is accurate for the insurance documentation. Amber thought back, replayed the scene in her head. I called 911 at 6:47. I remember because I checked my watch before I dialed. Jordan asked for the aspirin maybe 2 minutes later. So yeah, closer to 2 minutes than 90 seconds. But you wrote 90 seconds in your statement. I rounded down, I wasn't timing it precisely. Amber felt defensive without quite knowing why. Does it matter? Probably not, but there's a second discrepancy. Patricia's expression shifted, became more careful. Jordan's employment file lists his Wilderness First Responder cert, but it also lists a paramedic certification, National Registry. He never mentioned that in his incident report, or to Victor, or to the responding EMTs. Amber went still. He's a paramedic? Was. Certification's current, but he's not practicing, hasn't been for 3 years. Patricia looked up from the tablet. I only found out because the insurance investigator pulled his full credentials. He listed personal trainer as his current occupation on all the gym paperwork. Nothing about advanced medical training. Why would he hide that? No idea, but it changes the liability picture, and it makes me wonder what else he's not telling us. Patricia's tone was neutral, but there was an edge underneath. Did he ever mention it to you in the workshop or anywhere else? No. Amber's mind was racing. He said wilderness first responder. That's it. Yeah. Patricia shut off the tablet. Look, it's probably nothing, but corporate wants a follow-up conversation with him, and with anyone who's worked closely with him. That includes you, since you were present during the incident and you've attended his programming. I haven't worked closely with him. You signed up for his mobility clinic 2 weeks ago. I signed up, Amber corrected. I didn't go. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Your call. But if corporate reaches out, just be honest about what you know and what you don't. That's all they're looking for. She walked away, leaving Amber standing on the treadmill with her heart rate spiking for reasons that had nothing to do with exercise. A paramedic. Jordan was a paramedic. Had been a paramedic. And he'd never said a word. The questions multiplied in her head. Why leave a medical career for personal training? Why hide the credentials? What had happened 3 years ago that made him walk away from a job that clearly still defined his skill set? And why did it feel like a betrayal, even though he'd never owed her his history? Amber finished her workout on autopilot, showered, changed, and sat in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes trying to decide what to do. She could leave it alone. Mind her business, let corporate handle their investigation and stay out of it. Or she could ask him directly. The thought terrified her more than it should have. She found him that evening in the gym's office, filling out paperwork at a desk that was technically shared by all the trainers, but seemed to have become his default workspace. He looked up when she knocked on the open door, surprise flickering across his face before settling back into professional neutrality. "Hey," he said, "need something." "Can we talk?" Amber stepped inside, closing the door halfway. Not all the way. That felt too intense. "It's about Victor and the insurance stuff." Jordan set down his pen. "Patricia already talked to me. I know about the discrepancy in my report. That's not what I want to talk about." Amber sat down in the chair across from him, forced herself to meet his eyes. "Why didn't you tell anyone you're a paramedic?" The silence stretched between them. Jordan didn't look away, didn't deflect, but something in his posture shifted, became more guarded. "It's not relevant to my job here." "It's extremely relevant. You saved Victor's life because you had advanced training." "I saved his life because I recognized the symptoms and knew what to do. Wilderness first responder covers that." "But you're more than that." "Was." Jordan's voice went flat. "Past tense. I'm not a paramedic anymore. Your certification's current. Keeping it current doesn't mean I'm practicing." He picked up the pen again, clicked it twice, set it back down. "Is there something specific you want to know, or are you just here to interrogate me about my resume?" The edge in his tone stung. Amber forced herself not to retreat. "I want to know why you're hiding it, and I want to know if it has anything to do with why you left." "That's personal." So was kneeling on a gym floor doing cardiac assessments. Amber leaned forward. "You can't compartmentalize everything, Jordan. People are going to ask questions. Corporate's already asking." "Let them ask." His jaw tightened. "I'll tell them the same thing I'm telling you. My previous career isn't relevant to my current position. I meet all the requirements for my job here. Everything else is my business." "Even if it affects how people see you? Even if it makes them trust you less because you weren't honest?" "I never lied. Omission's still a choice." Jordan stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You want honesty? Fine. I left emergency medicine because I got tired of watching people die from preventable causes while I was powerless to do anything about it. I got tired of the hours and the burnout and the system that grinds you down until you're just a number on a shift schedule. I wanted to work with people who were trying to get better, not people who were already too far gone. That's why I'm here. That's why I train. Because prevention beats intervention every single time, and I'd rather teach someone how to move correctly than pull them out of a wreck they didn't have to be in." The words came out raw and unfiltered, stripped of the professional distance he usually maintained. Amber sat frozen, the weight of his honesty pressing against her chest. "I don't talk about it," Jordan continued, quieter now, Because the questions never stop. Everyone wants to know why I left, why I'm wasting my training, why I don't go back. Like there's some noble reason I'm supposed to give that makes it all make sense. But the truth is I was drowning and I chose to save myself. And I'm not ashamed of that, but I'm also not interested in defending it to every person who thinks they have a right to my story. I'm sorry, Amber said. The words felt inadequate. I shouldn't have pushed. You were right, though. Jordan sat back down, exhaustion replacing the anger in his expression. Omission is a choice, and I chose it because it was easier than explaining. But that's not fair to the people who trust me. So I'll talk to Patricia. I'll talk to corporate. I'll put it in my file officially instead of just keeping the certification quiet. For what it's worth, Amber said carefully, I think what you're doing now matters just as much as what you did before. Maybe more. You're keeping people healthy instead of fixing them after they break. That's not a waste. Jordan looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Thanks, that actually helps. They sat in silence for a beat, the tension draining from the room. Amber knew she should leave, give him space to process, but she couldn't quite make herself stand up. I owe you an apology too, she said finally. I've been kind of terrible to you since you started here, and it wasn't about you. It was about me being territorial and defensive, and assuming the worst because it was easier than giving you a chance. I noticed. A hint of a smile tugged at Jordan's mouth. But I also noticed you kept showing up, kept training, didn't let me disrupt your routine even when I was actively disrupting your routine. I respect that. You respect stubbornness? I respect consistency. And follow-through. You said you weren't interested in coaching, and you stuck to that even when I offered an olive branch. Most people fold when they get pushback. You doubled down. He shrugged. As someone who also tends to double down, I get it. So we're both stubborn. Apparently. Amber laughed despite herself. Well, at least we're consistent. The conversation shifted after that, became easier. They talked about training philosophy, about the difference between programming for performance versus health, about the runners Jordan had worked with, and the mistakes Amber had made in her own progression. It was the longest conversation they'd had that wasn't about logistics or emergencies, and Amber realized with some surprise that she liked talking to him, liked the way he thought, liked the way he challenged her assumptions without making her feel defensive. When she finally left the office an hour later, the gym was nearly empty. She sat in her car again, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what had just happened. They'd gone from antagonists to something like colleagues, maybe even something like friends, and the shift felt both sudden and inevitable, like a bone clicking back into alignment after weeks of compensating around the injury. She drove home thinking about paramedics and prevention, about the choices people made to save themselves, about the difference between running away and running toward something better. The intimate confrontation came 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when the gym was crowded, and Amber was pushing through her last set of deadlifts with form that was starting to deteriorate. She felt it in her lower back. That telltale tightness that meant she was compensating, recruiting the wrong muscles, setting herself up for an injury she'd regret on Monday. Jordan appeared at her elbow like he'd been watching. Drop the weight. Reset your hips. I'm fine, Amber said through gritted teeth. You're 2 reps away from a herniated disc. Drop the weight. She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she knew her own body, knew her own limits. But the tightness was getting worse, and Jordan's voice had that same unshakable certainty it had carried during Victor's emergency. So she lowered the barbell to the floor and straightened up, feeling the immediate relief in her spine. Show me your setup, Jordan said. I know how to deadlift. Show me anyway. Amber walked through the movement pattern without weight. Jordan circled her like a predator, watching from every angle, and then stopped directly in front of her. You're initiating from your back instead of your hips, probably because your glutes aren't firing. We talked about this in the workshop. I'm doing the activation exercises you sent me. Not enough, or not correctly. Either way, you're compensating. He crouched down, tapped her right glute. Feel that? It's not engaged. Now try to contract it while you're in the starting position. Amber tried. Failed. Tried again. I can't feel it. Yeah, that's the problem. Jordan stood up, crossed his arms. You need to regress the movement. Start with Romanian deadlifts, lighter weight. Focus on the hip hinge. Rebuild the pattern from scratch. I don't have time to regress. The words came out sharper than she intended. I have a half marathon in 6 weeks. I need to be building strength, not going backward. And if you herniate a disc today, you won't be running that race at all. Jordan's expression didn't change. Your call, but I'm not going to watch you hurt yourself because you're too stubborn to admit you need help. I'm not asking for your help. No, you never do. He picked up a lighter barbell from the rack, set it at her feet. But I'm offering it anyway, because watching you injure yourself would bother me, and because I think underneath all the defensiveness, you actually want to get better. You just don't want to ask. The observation hit too close to home. Amber stared at the lighter barbell, feeling the familiar war between pride and pragmatism. Why do you care? About you specifically, or about athletes in general? Either, both. Jordan was quiet for a moment. You remind me of someone I used to work with. Another runner, good athlete, terrible at listening to her body. Pushed through injuries until they became chronic. By the time she finally came to me for help, the damage was permanent. She never ran competitively again. And you don't want that to happen to me? No, I don't. He met her eyes, and there was something in his expression that made Amber's breath catch. Not pity, not condescension, just genuine concern from someone who'd seen this story before and didn't want to see it end the same way. You're talented, you're disciplined, but discipline without awareness is just ego in disguise, and ego gets people hurt. The words should have made her angry, should have triggered all her defenses, but instead they settled into the space behind her ribs like a truth she'd been avoiding. She was scared. Scared of losing progress, scared of admitting weakness, scared of needing someone else's expertise after years of relying on her own judgment. Okay, she said quietly. Show me the regression. Jordan's expression softened. Thank you for trusting me. They spent the next 45 minutes rebuilding her deadlift from the ground up. Jordan was patient but exacting, correcting minute details that Amber had never noticed, explaining the biomechanics in terms that made sense. He used his hands to guide her hips into position, to show her what engagement should feel like, and every point of contact was professional and impersonal, and somehow still electric. Amber tried to focus on the movement, on the cues, on the way her body felt different when she did it correctly. But she was hyper-aware of Jordan's proximity, the low timbre of his voice when he counted reps, the way he watched her with complete attention, like she was the only person in the gym. When they finished, her muscles were shaking and her ego was bruised, and she felt more clear-headed than she had in months. That was harder than I thought, she admitted. Good form usually is. Jordan handed her a water bottle. Ice your back when you get home, and start doing glute activation drills before every workout, not just on deadlift days. You're bossy when you're coaching. You're difficult when you're defending your ego. He smiled just a little. We balance each other out. Amber took a long drink of water, using the moment to collect herself. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you push sooner? You've been watching me train for weeks. You had to know my form was off. Jordan leaned against the squat rack, considering the question. Because you made it clear you didn't want coaching. And I respect boundaries. But there's a difference between respecting someone's choice and standing by while they hurt themselves. Today crossed that line. So you waited until I was actually in danger. I waited until intervening was more important than protecting your pride. Or mine. He looked at her directly, no deflection. For what it's worth, I should have said something earlier. I knew you were compensating. I just didn't know how to bring it up without you shutting me down. Again. I wouldn't have listened. Probably not. But I could have tried. Jordan pushed off the rack. Anyway, you listened today. That's what matters. They walked to the locker rooms together, fell into a companionable silence. Amber was acutely aware of the shift between them. The walls were still there, but thinner now, permeable. She could feel herself wanting to let him in further, wanting to know more about the person behind the professional mask. The runner you mentioned, she said as they reached the hallway split. "The one who got permanently injured. What happened to her?" Jordan's expression closed slightly. "She tried to come back too soon, didn't do the rehab work, thought she could power through. By the time she admitted she needed help, the chronic inflammation had caused structural damage. She can still run, just not at the level she used to." "Was she someone you cared about?" "Yeah." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The pain in his voice said enough. "I'm sorry." "Me too." Jordan met her eyes again. "But I learned from it, and I'm trying to make sure I don't make the same mistake twice." Amber understood what he wasn't saying, that he was trying to protect her the way he hadn't been able to protect the other runner, that he saw the same warning signs and refused to stay silent this time, that underneath his professional distance was someone who cared deeply and hurt when he couldn't help. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up on me. Thank you for finally letting me try." They parted ways at the locker room doors. Amber showered with her mind spinning, processing everything that had happened, the physical correction, the emotional honesty, the slow, careful way they were building something that felt like trust. She wanted to see him outside the gym, wanted to have a conversation that wasn't about training or injuries or professional boundaries. But she didn't know how to ask, didn't know if he felt the same pull she was starting to feel every time they were in the same room. The aftermath unfolded over the next 2 weeks. Amber followed Jordan's programming religiously, did the activation drills, regressed her lifts, swallowed her pride and asked questions when she didn't understand a cue. Her form improved, her glutes started firing correctly, the tightness in her back disappeared. The half marathon came and went. She finished with a personal best, knocked 3 minutes off her previous time, and crossed the finish line knowing she'd gotten there without injury because she'd finally been willing to accept help. Jordan was waiting at the finish line. She hadn't expected that, hadn't told him when or where the race was, but there he was holding a bottle of electrolyte water and a small handwritten sign that said, "Stubborn Runner Number 1." "How did you know?" Amber asked, still breathing hard. "You mentioned it 6 weeks ago, I remembered." He handed her the water. "Nice time, Fart. Thanks to you. Thanks to you being willing to do the work." Jordan fell into step beside her as she walked through the post-race crowd. "How do you feel?" "Good. Strong. No pain." Amber grinned, despite herself. "Okay, fine, you were right. The regression helped. I'm always right about biomechanics." He said it deadpan, but there was warmth underneath. Less right about other things. But that's a different conversation. They walked in silence for a moment. Amber could feel the question building in her chest, the one she'd been avoiding for weeks. "Do you want to get coffee? Like actual coffee? Not post-workout protein shakes at the gym. Actual sit-down coffee, where we talk about things that aren't training-related." Jordan stopped walking, looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Like a date? If you want it to be, or just as friends. I'm flexible." Amber felt her pulse spike, the same way it did at the start of a hard race. "I just want to spend time with you when we're not both covered in sweat and arguing about hip hinges." "I'd like that." Jordan smiled, genuine and unguarded. "But for the record, I'm fine with the sweat and the arguments too. Those are kind of our thing. We do have a pattern, a consistent one." They ended up at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the race finish, sitting at a corner table with mugs of dark roast and a shared cinnamon roll that neither of them really wanted, but ordered anyway, because it felt like the kind of thing people did on dates. The conversation flowed easier than Amber expected. They talked about music and books and the terrible action movies Jordan loved and refused to be embarrassed about. They talked about why Amber had stopped competing in college, about Jordan's brief attempt at medical school before he switched to paramedicine, about the ways they'd both rebuilt their lives around healthier versions of ambition. "Can I ask about the runner?" Amber said eventually. "The one you mentioned. Was she your girlfriend?" Jordan nodded slowly. "For about a year. We met during my first job as a paramedic. She was a trauma nurse at the same hospital. We understood the weird hours and the burnout. Made sense at the time. What happened? She got injured during a marathon. Stress fracture in her foot. Tried to keep training through it. By the time she admitted something was wrong, It had progressed to a full break, needed surgery. The recovery didn't go well. She developed chronic regional pain syndrome, and I felt like I should have seen it coming, should have noticed the signs, should have done something before it was too late. That's not your fault. Rationally, I know that. Emotionally, Jordan shrugged, still working on it, but it's part of why I'm so cautious with athletes now, why I err on the side of intervention even when it pisses people off. Did you two stay together? For a few months after the injury, but the relationship couldn't survive the resentment. She resented me for not stopping her sooner. I resented myself for the same reason. We both needed someone to blame, and we were convenient targets. He took a sip of coffee. We're on good terms now. She actually encouraged me to leave emergency medicine, said I'd be better suited to prevention than crisis response. She was right. Amber reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. I'm glad you listened. Jordan looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her. I'm glad you're letting me help you, even though it took a while. I'm stubborn. I noticed, but you're also coachable when you decide to trust someone. That's rare. He turned his hand over, laced his fingers through hers. I like it. I like you, Amber said before she could overthink it. I know that's probably obvious at this point, but I wanted to say it out loud. I like you too. Have since the first morning, honestly, even when you were glaring at me like I'd personally insulted your entire family. I was not glaring. You were absolutely glaring. It was terrifying and kind of impressive. Jordan squeezed her hand gently. But I get it. I disrupted your space, didn't handle it with enough consideration. That's on me. We both could have done better. Yeah, but we're doing better now. He leaned back in his chair without letting go of her hand. So, this is a date, right? We're clear on that. Very clear. Good, because I'd like to take you on more of them. Preferably ones where you're not recovering from a race and I'm not covered in gym chalk. Amber laughed. I think that can be arranged. They stayed at the coffee shop until closing, talking through the afternoon into early evening. And when they finally walked out into the cool night air, Jordan kept hold of her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. He drove her back to her car at the race starting line, and before she got out, he leaned over and kissed her. Soft. Careful. A question and an answer all at once. I'll see you Monday, he said when they broke apart. At the gym. Where else? He grinned. We can keep arguing about your form. Looking forward to it. Amber drove home with her race medal on the passenger seat and the taste of coffee and cinnamon still on her lips. She thought about first impressions and second chances, about the difference between stubbornness and strength, about how the people who challenged you the most were often the ones you needed the most. The epilogue came 6 months later. Amber was in Jordan's apartment helping him prep meals for the week when her phone buzzed with an email notification. She glanced at it absently, then froze. What's wrong? Jordan looked up from the cutting board. I got accepted. Amber stared at the screen. To the trail running coaching certification program I applied for. They want me to start in January. That's amazing. Jordan set down the knife, crossed to her. Why do you look terrified? Because it's a big commitment, 6 months of intensive training. And I don't know if I'm ready to be responsible for other people's development when I'm still figuring out my own. You're more ready than you think. You've been helping the beginner runners at the gym for months now. They trust you, they listen to you, you have good instincts. I learned those instincts from you. You refined them with me. But the foundation was already there. Jordan pulled her into a hug. And if you want to do this, I'll support you, help you practice, be your test subject for programming, whatever you need. Amber wrapped her arms around him, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne and the laundry detergent they'd started using because it didn't irritate her skin after long runs. What if I mess it up? Then you'll learn from it. Same as everything else. Same as you learned from me. Same as I'm still learning from you. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Besides, messing up is how we got here in the first place. I'd say it worked out pretty well. She kissed him long and slow and felt the fear settle into something more manageable. Not gone. just integrated into the broader landscape of her life, where taking risks had stopped meaning recklessness and started meaning growth. "I'm going to accept it," she said. "Good. I'm proud of you." They went back to meal prep, fell into their familiar rhythm of working side by side, and Amber thought about how far they'd both come from that first morning at the gym. From antagonists to colleagues to something deeper and more complicated, and infinitely better than she could have predicted. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Patricia at the gym. "Need you and Jordan to cover the workshop next Thursday. Original instructor cancelled. Your choice of topic." Amber showed Jordan the message. He read it, smiled. "What do you want to teach?" "How about injury prevention for stubborn athletes? I have some personal experience with that. Co-taught by two people who are terrible at taking their own advice. I like it." He kissed her temple. "We'll be great. Or we'll argue the entire time and confuse everyone." Also possible, but at least it'll be entertaining. They finished prepping meals, ate dinner on the couch while watching one of Jordan's terrible action movies, and fell asleep tangled together in a way that had become routine over the months. Comfortable, safe, built on honesty and trust, and the slow, patient work of learning to let someone else in. Outside, the city hummed with its usual late-night energy. Inside, Amber listened to Jordan's steady breathing and thought about workshops and certifications and the strange, unpredictable way life could shift when you stopped fighting the people who were trying to help you get better. She still came to the gym at 6:30 most mornings, still claimed her spot by the squat rack. But now Jordan was usually there too, and instead of resentment she felt anticipation. For the conversation, for the work, for the life they were building together, one careful, deliberate choice at a time. The water bottle from that first morning was still in her gym bag. She'd never replaced it. Kept it as a reminder of how wrong first impressions could be, how much could change when you were willing to look past your own defenses and see the person standing in front of you. Jordan knew about the water bottle, had asked her about it once. She told him the whole story, start to finish, every petty assumption and stubborn moment. He'd laughed and said it was the most romantic origin story he'd ever heard. She'd disagreed, but she'd kept the water bottle anyway, because some things were worth holding on to, even when they reminded you of your worst moments, especially when they led to your best ones.